Because we share. Because we share.
I really covet this position in the bit bucket. It's the last segment of the last session of Share, and I've been doing this for a while, and I really like being able to stand up here at this point. Sam mentioned being in a bookstore and not finding much in the way of books on assembler, but I think he did not notice the book called 50 Shades of Blue. There are several chapters in there on kinky things you could do in assembler. It's a different kind of how-to manual, I guess, but it's going to be a bestseller, I'm sure of that. Just the title alone is going to do it. So I have a few little pieces here that are 2.1 related, installation, early stuff. Would have liked to incorporate them into the user session earlier this week, so think of it as a sequel to the Tom and Jerry show. The first one is sort of long and drawn out because I tell it as a saga, as I experienced it. And the other two at the end are quite a bit shorter. Okay, I call this Irreconciled Differences for a reason, and you'll see when I get to the end. Not irreconcilable, because I do believe that they are truly reconcilable, but these differences were not reconciled, and in fact ended up with counseling sessions that still never really got past the problems. So we use NetView system automation in our shop. Not forever, we converted from another product, but for the last year or two, we depend completely on it, on automation. I think most shops these days that have automation really have a hard time getting along without it. Our operators who used to know how to issue commands and sequences of things now just, well, in fact, they don't even start anything. It comes up automatically at IPL. There's one prompt early on that says, how do you want to bring the system up? And they just reply normal, and the next thing should be telling users that they can log on. So we use it for startup and shutdown. We use it for task restart in the case of abend, and also message handling. Okay, that's one thing automation does. You use it to respond, for example, to WTORs, but you also can, if you have automation, you can take some other action. So you see message ABC, and that means it's time to start task XYZ. Okay, so you can do all this stuff in automation. And without automation, I don't think we could IPL a system. I don't think we could even shut down a system other than just vary XCF off. So I installed z/OS 2.1 from a server pack, and I appealed it on a sandbox system. That's our normal method of moving. It's one member of a two-member full-function parallel sysplex, which is very small. It gets very little usage, but it really has all the bells and whistles of any of our other production systems. We do that because we need to see early on that things are going to work okay. So like all of our sysplexes, everything is shared. Now I say everything, of course, you can't share page data sets and some oddball things like that by the nature of the technology, but other than that, everything in the environment is shared. Data sets, catalogs, the whole kit and caboodle. So we had been running R13 on this sysplex since our ESP days. We were an ESP customer for R13, so that goes back to several months before GA or whenever the heck that was, and it had been running R13 for that length of time. But now, having IPL this, we are running different levels. R13 on one side and 2.1 on the other. Again, that's standard operating procedure for an early rollout. Now, most everything came up fine on that first IPL. We had a couple little tweaks to make, but basically okay, except system automation. It simply did not work. We had all kinds of errors and failures, some abends, some weird messages, things that displays that level 2 wanted us to do didn't even work. But still, the other member of the sysplex using almost everything shared was working just fine. And again, they used all the same files except two different sysreses, and everything that's on the sysres would be different. But other than that, they were sharing everything. So we opened an SR with IBM, and level 2 was mystified as to what was happening. They had not seen this before, it didn't make any sense to them. This R13 server pack, the older one, had come with NetView 6.1 and SA33. That's just the timing of the order. Remember, early on, before GA, that's what was there. The 2.1 server pack came with NetView 6.2 and SA34. So there was an upgrade to both of those products, but not what would appear to be a giant leap. So there was a lot of doc flowing back and forth. We're showing them this, and they're trying, it went on and on for a long time. And there were lots of suggestions, and we would try out their suggestions, and things were not working, including rebuilding the SA environment, lots of stuff. There was lots of frustration and delays. Now, this delay literally was months. Now, that's not the fault of level 2. I'm not blaming them for that. We had a serious availability problem of Mr. SA, who wasn't around for long periods of time. And rather than take control of it myself, I tried to let him do that. But I was also monitoring the SR to see what the heck was going on. So we were stuck. We were stuck on one member of the sandbox sysplex for a long time, way long time. Eventually, somewhere along the line, somebody mentioned, somewhere in a doc, or I can't remember where it came from, the subsystem name table. Now, IEFSSN, the subsystem name table, defines the ZOS subsystems for IBM, for vendor products, and for any user-written subsystems that you might have. They all go essentially into one table, and at IPL time, all the subsystems get built way early on in the IPL, pretty much before any real tasks get started. And those include entries for both NetView, the network version of NetView, whatever you want to call that, and for SA. They have their own subsystem entries as well. Now, we try to avoid, and this is sort of a key to the way we run our shop, we try to avoid duplicating similar ParmLib members. What I found is over time, if you have two different members in ParmLib that are different only in a small way, that over time, somebody's going to make a mistake. Somebody's going to go into one and make a modification and forget that they need to go to the other one and make the same modification. And I'm guilty of that as well. I try to avoid that situation. So we try to have a completely shared member, ParmLib member, for all systems unless absolutely necessary otherwise. So in this case, we had two members for SSNT, a shared 00, which was in our off sysres ParmLib, and a member 01. And we concatenated them as 00 and 01 in IEA Sys. So the layout of 00 is the one that we had used traditionally for the most part. It started out with an entry for SMS at the top, an entry for JES2, a couple of entries for these IP things, which I have no idea why they're there, but they've been there for a long time. And then this keyword that I implemented after I came home from a share a while back called begin parallel. Begin parallel says that from this point on, all the subsystems that are named can be initialized in any order as they are available. Okay? In the old days, without this, it was all sequential. From top to bottom, they were all created in a thread. The last one would be last, and so on. But this begin parallel means at this point, you can start working on all of them. The early nucleus initialization program, whatever the thing is called, can do them all at once. And then a whole bunch of other entries for all sorts of other subsystems. SS01 contained only the entries for NetView and SA and nothing else. Why? Okay, this is a hot button of mine. It stays hot. This button has never been allowed to cool off completely. It has to do with incompatible product changes. This happens every now and again where some products, somewhere, not necessarily core ZOS, but it has to be in ParmLib, and that product makes a change of some sort to a statement in ParmLib which is not accepted by previous versions. So you have to make this change, and you cannot share that statement with a previous version. In this case, NetView 6 had changed the SSN entry by adding the initialization routine statement. In version 5, that was not there, and in fact, you couldn't use it. Okay, so version 5 was never kick-started to say ignore this or whatever anyway. So if you tried to use this statement under version 5, it would fail. If you didn't have it under version 6, it would fail. So you were required, in order to get through this transition, to have two different statements. And the way I handled that was to create the separate member which lived on sysres. So this 01 guy with my NetView and SA was on sysres, and in our case for release 12, which was the older NetView, he would use that statement, and then the other sysres for version 13, for R13, would use the new one. And it seemed to work just fine. It worked fine for R12, it worked fine for R13. Okay, so sysres then for 2.1, I built it the same way. I mean, just kind of out of habit. So I created an 01 member on the R21 sysres, V2R1 sysres with those now same entries, okay, the same ones, because version 6.2 of NetView didn't change over 6.1. And I built it the same way, even though, and here's the key, even though the compatibility problem was long gone. Release 12 had been discarded along the way, long before this. So I no longer needed those separate statements, but just out of habit, I created the structure of the subsystem name table the same way. Well, that turned out to be the entire problem. Something I guess that level 2 had never seen before, couldn't conceive, because I was violating instructions that came with the version 6 NetView. That is, years earlier, a couple of years earlier, they had said, do such and such with your subsystem name entries. I had not done it that way, but I didn't notice because it always worked up until now. So, it was not a NetView issue, not a NetView problem, or SA. I simply took the NetView entries and I put them in the original subsystem name table in front of begin parallel. Okay, so near the top, so that everything else that followed would have those subsystems already there. And the way these subsystems work is that when a command comes through, or a message or whatever, ZOS will pass it to each of the subsystems in turn to see who is interested in handling it. If it's a command, that subsystem will take care of it. If it's a message, that subsystem will do whatever it's going to do with it. And it always goes in order throughout the whole sequence. And if you get invalid command, when you type in your name, and it comes back invalid command, every subsystem has looked at that, and ZOS has looked at it, and they've all agreed that they don't know what to do with it. And only at that point does the systems come back and say invalid command. If any subsystem along the way grabs it and says, I've taken care of this, and they mark it as processed, then ZOS doesn't get excited about that. So, in order to fix this problem, I just eliminated the 01 guy altogether. He was no longer necessary. Hadn't been ever since R13 had rolled out. And so after literally months of stagnation, this problem just went away with the few strokes of the edit. I was kind of embarrassed, let me tell you. And embarrassed and really kind of against the wall, because again, my SA guy's availability was very limited, and he had wasted all these cycles trying to solve a problem that was never his in the first place. So, the conclusion of this, again back to my hot button, is that incompatible parm changes are deadly. I started with several different words for deadly as I was writing this and decided that for political correctness I would stick with that. So, okay, you can substitute any kind of insulting slang word for deadly and you'll get the sense. The problem is the customer is forced to invent his own weird accommodations for this incompatible change. There is no standard way of doing this. There's no automatic. There's no simple mechanical process that you can invoke. You have to figure out, as the customer, how to get past this incompatibility. And clearly I chose something that it worked for a while, but having worked for such a long time, I completely forgot about it. And when it got to 2.1, and never occurred to me until way into this problem that that was the actual issue. And I conclude that I'm simply not smart enough to handle this kind of a change. And again, I appeal to IBM, whatever it takes, don't make the customer suffer this. Put some kind of an accommodation into a lower release to handle the new keyword. It doesn't happen real often, but when it does, it can be a real problem. Okay. In the process of installing 2.1, I've surprisingly got some assembly errors for JES 2. We normally just take our exit code, it was for exit 6. We normally just simply take our exit code, we update the SMP information, the little wrapper for the right version, reassemble, and it just works. It's been a long time since we had to touch any of our exits. I think probably release 7, when JES 2 made so many changes, it's probably the last time we had any serious problem with our exits assembling. But here I got this assembly error. And it turns out when I dug around, and it wasn't obvious because there were no like flags around this, that there had some fields had been moved from this thing called $TE or $DCN into $CI work. And not, well, moved, but also renamed, okay? So at least Jez 2 is good about that. When they make a change, even if it's a field size, which could be a real problem if you didn't realize, they do change the name of the field so you will know at assembly time that you have to make some accommodation. So I knew I needed to fix it, but it was a real head scratcher to try to figure out what was wrong. Now, some documentation and conversation suggested that this was done in support of batch modernization. Okay, that was the phrase. So in x'6 we used these fields, which are described as I show here, an ACB for system message data set, and that's why that was so important. If you want to write a message out to the system message data set, you use a pointer to this to get to the routine that does that. And then there's a scheduling environment for the job. We use sort of in-house scheduling environment adaptation of what IBM supplies with keywords and all sorts of things. And then another one called the address of the CAT for the job. And so those three fields were no longer where they used to be, moved, and so their coding had to be changed in order to accommodate that. There were other fields as well that we didn't happen to use, but they all got moved to this $CI work field, control block. And those are the names of the new guys. And the point is that these control block changes hit you up front at assembly time, and it doesn't matter whether you're going to use batch modernization, whether you're going to implement that or any changes. That was the motivation, but it doesn't matter how you run Jez, you're going to see these problems right up front. Now, since I ran into this problem back in, I don't know, summertime of 14, I guess, there's been effort on the behalf of Jez 2 people, and Marna's gotten involved to try to publicize these changes. There were some just very cryptic comments that things had changed, but no description at that time of what had changed and how. So if you have exits, just be aware, particularly exit 6 seems to be vulnerable to this. And I think particularly because of that ACB guy, if you want to write messages to your job log or your, I guess the job log part, anyway, you need that pointer to that routine, which is out there somewhere. So regardless of how you intend to actually run Jez, you are likely to run into this problem, or may run into this problem. Okay, Robo Logo. In vanilla ISPF, I believe, well, we haven't run a vanilla ISPF for so long, I can't remember, but I think it's standard that you get this logo display when you first come in to ISPF, when you first enter. And you can see from the bottom, they call it a logo, but it's really a copyright notice, and I guess that's important for some companies to have this. It was never important for us, and we never displayed it. But when I brought up ISPF under 2.1, I couldn't suppress it. It just showed up every single time. Now, we modify the primary option panel heavily. I don't recommend that, but it's kind of a tradition. And the code that we put in to modify it was essentially the same code. It's been very constant over many releases. We just go in and tweak a little bit of thing here and there. But basically, those lines work the same way. We've not had a problem like this in forever, I guess. And I tried all kinds of things, but essentially every time it re-entered ISPF, including a start. If you did a start new panel, I would get this logo again. It's like, what's this crazy? So I talked about this on IBM Main. I put the question out, how do you people handle this logo? And I got various suggestions from various people. And somebody who I'm sorry to say I can't remember now suggested this modification at the end to comment out 2 lines, which we had never needed to comment out before. Well, once we commented those lines out, then the logo stopped displaying, and everything was kind of back to normal. So if you don't modify the panel and you don't care about the logo, then it probably doesn't matter, but this is what we had to do in order to make that work. Okay, that's all I have. Got some acknowledgments for people who have helped. It's supposed to say, see you in Orlando, because that is the main message of this whole end of the bit bucket, is that we hope you will all come back, you will join us again, and 6 months from now, more or less, we'll have another Bitbucket session, which will, at the end, say, see you in San Antonio.